It's time for the return of the NINO in the Pacific Northwest. We'll be breaking down a familiar Pro Bowl face coming back to Seattle here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Whether you're tuning in from Oak Harbor, Washington, or over in Detroit, Michigan, we greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week and making Locked On Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network out there. Seahawks bringing back a familiar face today to help an injury-marred secondary. We'll be diving into the return of Quandre Diggs and what that means for the Seahawks on defense. We've got Tell the Truth Tuesday takeaways and some interesting ones at that. And then we'll be taking a first look at what's new with the Minnesota Vikings, who could be unleashing a new quarterback for this weekend against the Seahawks on Sunday afternoon. This episode brought your way courtesy of our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Seattle has had a number of injuries in the secondary, particularly the safety position. Julian Love is eligible to come off injured reserve this week, but it remains to be seen if he's even going to be practicing. Mike McDonald certainly didn't give any hints to that on Monday. And Okada dealing with an oblique injury that could keep him out for at least a couple weeks, maybe even be an injured reserve candidate. With that being said, a familiar face is coming back to the Pacific Northwest. Quandre Diggs, three-time Pro Bowl safety for the Seahawks, one of the only a handful of safeties to have that many Pro Bowl selections in a Seahawks uniform, will be coming back to the Pacific Northwest as a member of the practice squad. And Rob, this is the way that teams do this with veteran players this stage of the season. And I think it's one of the best parts about the expanded practice squads that were put in place with the last CBA. It really has been a game changer where you can bring in a player like Quandre Diggs, who isn't in the prime of his career anymore, but is still a capable starting caliber safety. The Titans wanted to give some younger guys opportunities. That was the main reason they released him a few weeks ago. Now he gets a chance to come back to where he had the best years in the prime of his career. And you know Mike McDonald is going to be excited for the opportunity to bring in somebody that has the football IQ and the ball hawking capabilities that Quandre Diggs still brings to the equation.
Yeah, no question about it, Corbin. I mean, that was one of the things that we talked about in yesterday's show is that this is a Seahawks squad that has so much talent, but it hasn't seen a lot of turnovers on defense. And that's one thing that Quandre Diggs certainly provides. 18 of his 24 career interceptions came as a member of the Seattle Seahawks. Look, he's no spring chicken. He's 32 years old, going on 33. But at the same time, he also is quite savvy in the secondary. His ability, while he has not played in Mike McDonald's system, his ability to play both the strong and free safety positions, his ability to defend the deep ball, it just offers the Seahawks a lot more flexibility. Now, with Okada dealing with that oblique injury, as you mentioned, almost unprompted, Mike McDonald said that there could be a possibility of the injured reserve list for Okada and a couple of the other injured Seahawks from that Titans game. And so I do think that this is a move that is based on Okada's injury, as well as the fact that, as you acknowledged as well, that we just still don't know where Julian Love is and how quickly he is going to get back onto the field. So as you said, more of the practice squad move at this point. So nobody should be expecting that Quandre Diggs is going to be in the starting lineup this week against the Minnesota Vikings. But it does allow the Seahawks an awful lot of flexibility. And with a proven player that should be able to come in when he is in game shape. And he, of course, was playing for the Tennessee Titans just a month or so ago, that he should be able to come in, be a hand-in-glove type of a fit.
And I will say this, if there's a guy that can come in and play in Mike McDonald's defense and be able to play 3 days after starting to practice, Quandre Diggs is the guy that can do it. Because, I've had, the privilege of being able to talk to Quandre in the locker room several times. And I don't know that there's a safety out there that likes digging into the film and digging into schematic stuff more than what NINO does. So he is going to be able to come in, and the guy has played in a bunch of different defenses. And this is a conversation that we had at one point when he was still with the Seahawks, that he's played in a number of these defenses. And look, the terminology and stuff's got to get down, but he has been in every different type of scheme that you can play in his NFL career. He's played multiple positions. He played some in the slot early in his career. This is going to be a different situation for him, but I think Mike McDonald is going to have the confidence that he can put him in a number of spots and you can still have some of that interchangeability. And this doesn't force you to have to play him this weekend if he isn't ready either. This could be a case where, hey, we're going to get you ready with our playbook. So if Julian Lover or Okada or both of them miss more than one game, we absolutely then can get you into the lineup when we play the Falcons or the Colts those next couple of weeks. So they may not have to force the issue, and it could be a case that they elevate him this weekend as a practice squad promotion just as an insurance policy. And what an insurance policy that would be. And I know, reading some of the comments that people were making, looking into the news that broke today when this came out, like no interceptions the last 2 years. I think a lot of that's had to do with the fact that teams haven't necessarily tested him the last 2 years. He's still got ball skills. That is the one thing that he absolutely still brings to the equation. And there's a number of guys that are still in this team that played with him a few years ago. So he is not going to be just some novice coming into the locker room in terms of being able to fit in with this group. This is not going to be a guy that's going to be a culture issue. If anything, he is going to help your locker room coming back with a number of these guys. So I think this is a fantastic move. And I'll be honest, when Okada got hurt on Sunday, the fact they were playing in Tennessee where Diggs had played a few weeks ago before being released, that was the first thing that popped in my mind. If this is significant, I wonder if they are going to go down that well, because we know how much John Schneider values Quandre Diggs. Mike McDonald loved him. It's just the contract that he had. Seattle had to make some financial moves, and so that's part of the business. But Mike McDonald likes Quandre Diggs. I can tell you that right now. Diggs likes McDonald. I think that this will be a really good fit if they need him to play a lot of snaps. And they may not need that, but it's a really good insurance policy to have on your practice squad. There's no question about it.
Yeah, and I do think that D'Anthony Bell is most likely going to be the safety who's going to slide in right next to Kobe Bryant. But to your point, Corbin, about just the familiarity he has with a number of the members of Seattle's secondary. Of course, he's got an awful lot of experience playing alongside of Kobe Bryant and Rick Woolen in particular. And then again, speaking of his versatility, former slot corner, has also played both strong and free safeties for a number of different NFL teams, Detroit Lions, Seattle Seahawks, and now most recently the Tennessee Titans. For all the critics out there that say this is a guy that was released, he was he wasn't playing for an NFL team. He asked for his release. I think that he was hoping for an opportunity just like this to play for a contender. There is nothing that I've seen from Quandre Diggs on his tape this past season as well as last year that suggests that he can't still play at an NFL level, especially when he is surrounded by the caliber of talent that Seattle has in the secondary. So again, I think that this was a win-win for the player and certainly for the team.
Yeah, and this is a guy that was incredibly popular his first time in Seattle. There's a lot of Seahawks fans that are fired up just to have a familiar name and a guy that, look, again, 3-time Pro Bowler. He was one of the very best safeties in football during those 3 years, and he is not in his prime anymore. But looking at the tape, I've had a chance to look over some of those Titans games preparing for this last week when the Seahawks were playing them, and I didn't see anything that suggested to me that Quandre Diggs couldn't play. But this was a case like with Tyler Lockett, another former Seahawk. I think some of these veterans, when you're on a team like that has a coaching change, sometimes teams just want to play their young guys when they know they're in a rebuild, and it ends up being a mutual decision to move on from vets. So this is to me, the ideal landing spot for Quandre Diggs here. And you know what? When they get some of these guys back healthy, it has an insurance policy that's still going to be available to you on the practice squad. And Quandre Diggs gets the chance to potentially play in meaningful postseason games again for the Seahawks as well. So I'm really curious to see how all this plays out in terms of this week, because again, he's got to learn this new playbook. But if there's a guy that could play someone Sunday, 3 days after joining the practice field, Quandre Diggs is the guy that can do that. And I can tell you that from the conversations that I've had and just knowing the way that he plays and how passionate he is about the game, that he would be a guy that would be ready for that type of a challenge if the Seahawks needed him to play some snaps in sub packages this weekend against the Vikings. Coming up next, we are going to jump into our Tell the Truth Tuesday wisdom. We're going to be dishing out some takeaways coming out of the game on Sunday and looking towards the next week against the Minnesota Vikings. That's coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get into the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game and want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score first to the fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head on over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. The show is also brought your way by Duer. I'm super excited about the jeans that I just got from Duer. There were all kinds of amazing things I heard before I had them, and it has lived up to the hype and then some. 5 times the stretch of traditional denim. They're antibacterial, meaning your jeans stay fresh longer so you can wear more and wash less. Duer combines classic jeanswear style with the kind of comfort and performance you get from athletic wear. It's the best of both worlds, designed to look great and stay comfortable all day, no matter what you're doing. Duer are pioneers of blending technical innovation with everyday clothing. They invented the original performance denim. Simply put, Duer makes the world's most comfortable pants without having to sacrifice style. Get a pair for yourself or as an amazing holiday gift by going to shopduer.com/lockedonseattle. That'll get you 15% off your first order. That's shopduer.com/lockedonseattle for 15% off. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate your support of the podcast. As we do every Tuesday, it's Tell the Truth Tuesday. And we're going to be dishing out some takeaways coming out of Sunday's game, kind of putting a ribbon on everything from that win in Tennessee, and then looking forward to Week 13 with the Minnesota Vikings coming to Lumen Field on Sunday. So, Rob, let's kick off the festivities here. And you and I, we're going to go a little different direction, I think, on this. But I think we got to talk a little about non-Jaxon Smith-Njigba receivers, because there's a lot of questions there. I mean, JSN is around 48% of Seattle's receiving yards this year. That is the most that any receivers had dating back to 1975 for a team. So some would say, well, that just tells you how great JSN's playing, but that also tells you, man, they really could use a few other guys stepping up and picking up a little more of the load here. So you and I know, are on a little different tangent here, because I'm going to be looking from a little bit more pessimistic lens, but I know that there's something that you feel is on the verge of happening that hasn't yet with Rashid Shaheed.
Yeah, I mean, Corbin, here we are in Thanksgiving week. And so I think that we're just basically going to be talking about the different side dishes, so to speak. And I'm going to start off with Rashid Shaheed, who I think that his straight line speed, his ability to get open, I think is going to lead to a breakout game very, very soon for the Seahawks. And I noticed this against the Los Angeles Rams a couple of weeks ago, and then again against the Tennessee Titans, where there are multiple times on tape where he is open. And so, and of course, his familiarity with Clint Kubiak's offense, after both of them were with the New Orleans Saints before, we were expecting him to be able to come in and make an immediate impact. And it just hasn't happened yet in the passing game. I do, however, expect him to continue to work with Sam Darnold, develop the relationship, the camaraderie between he and the quarterback that Jackson Smith-Njigba and several of Seattle's other wide receivers have already established. Once that occurs, I do think that you are going to see Rashid Shaheed become a more successful part of Seattle's offense, and not only successful, an explosive, an explosive part of Seattle's offense. And that, of course, is going to bode well for Seattle's passing attack just in general. And it is going to probably drop down Jackson Smith-Njigba's, large percentage of Seattle's passing attack. But I think that the versatility of Seattle's offense is going to be better, and that's going to lead to a longer playoff run for the Seahawks.
Yeah, on that front, it's still only been 3 games. Guys that had not played together in Sam Darnold and Rashid Shaheed. And there have been a couple plays that have kind of tantalized a little bit that just haven't quite finished. That touchdown that could have been in LA that was just underthrown just a hair, and a really good play by Emmanuel Forbes there. It feels like they are getting close. What I'm starting to get a little bit concerned about with this receiving core, they can't get that next step with Cooper Kupp. And I don't know if we're going to see that. He's had a couple games this year where he has been more of a factor, but generally speaking, we'll go 2 or 3 quarters without him getting a target sometimes in this offense. And that was not the expectation when they signed him to a 3-year deal this offseason after the Rams cut him. And I'm not sitting here saying Cooper Kupp is washed up, because when I see him make catches, I don't see that. I see a guy that is still fluid enough of a mover and can create after the catch, and he gets open. But for whatever reason, there just has not been the volume there as that second receiver, or in this case now third maybe with Shaheed. I think they need to have a little bit more Kupp in their offensive cup, so to speak. I think there needs to be a little more from him here in these last 6 games. It's not saying that JSN can't be your featured weapon, because he's still going to be your guy. But I feel like if this team is really going to reach their ceiling, they've got to have a little bit more from Cooper Kupp, and they certainly need to have more from Rashid Shaheed. And I agree with you. I think that's coming. Cooper Kupp, we're now at the stage of the season, you're just like hoping you can start to get more consistent contributions from him, because when he has made plays, they've been nice. But again, you'll go 2 or 3 quarters where it's like, is Cooper Kupp even playing in this game? And, you don't notice him unless maybe he makes a nice run block or whatever. They need more from him moving forward if they want to hit their peak this year offensively. On the defensive side of the football, there's plenty of things we could discuss coming out of this football game for the Seahawks, but I want to dish out some thoughts on the edge position real quick here, Rob. We've talked so much about Boye Mafe. Yesterday it was Uchenna Nwosu, guys that are going to need new contracts. Derek Hall is 1 year further away from his opportunity. He can't get an extension till this upcoming spring. I think Derek Hall is the one that makes the most sense, though, right now for the Seattle Seahawks. If you're looking at the young edge that's on this roster that should be extended, Derek Hall's the guy that maybe the sack numbers haven't been here, just got his first sack, but he's at a close to 19.5% pass rush win rate. He has been incredibly effective getting after QBs. We know the energy and the firepower that he brings as a run defender as well. He has gotten better in that regard. And he just seems like a Mike McDonald style player. He is a younger player as well. He's only 24. Boye Mafe was 24 when he came into the league. I would make the argument that is the player that when I'm going into this offseason that I'm saying, if I can ink somebody up, Derek Hall is the one. If I have to pick, you could sign multiple guys at that position, but he would be the one that I would argue at this point that I would feel most comfortable giving a long-term extension, still believing that there's the upside for a double-digit sack producer there to go with everything else that he brings from an energy standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think in terms of his size, his style, his youth, his just his ability to play both the run and the pass, that Derek Hall looks like the kind of a player that you would like to have be part of the long-term foundation of this club. And so I'll kind of follow your lead on that. While I do want to talk about another player on offense, I'll wait on that conversation and stick with another defensive stalwart that I think is very much part of Seattle's foundation, both now and certainly in the future. Now, Byron Murphy is also not yet eligible for an extension, but my goodness, he looks like somebody that the Seahawks are going to want to extend. I think that after watching the All-22 tape, that I thought the Byron Murphy II was the best player on the football field for either the Tennessee Titans or the Seattle Seahawks in last weekend's victory. His statistics were good. 5 tackles, had a sack, had a tackle for loss, had a quarterback hit, but his presence on the field was even better. Certainly my favorite play was the sack, where he and the rest of Seattle's defensive line lined up out of the 2-point stance, so their hand was not in the dirt. They basically walked up to the line, and they just overwhelmed Tennessee's offensive line in that particular play. Cam Ward was able to escape multiple tackle attempts by many defenders throughout the game, not against Byron Murphy II. On this particular play, he and Devin Witherspoon basically just called like, let's meet at the quarterback kind of a thing. Whether it was the former first-round pick, Peter Skoronski at the left guard position, the big center, Lloyd Cushenberry at right or at center, or Kevin Zeitler, a former Pro Bowl right guard, it didn't matter. Byron Murphy II was basically just bulldozing everybody. And so I thought that he was terrific. Doesn't get enough credit for the incredible performance in which he had against the Tennessee Titans.
And the last thing that I'm going to dish out here for our Tell the Truth Tuesday, get a little bit of news mixed in here too. Quandre Diggs coming back to Seattle again. They have not officially announced that, but one move that did happen today on the 53-man roster, cornerback Derion Kendrick, who had a really good start when he was replacing Devin Witherspoon earlier this year, had a couple of interceptions, had a few pass breakups in starts in the slot, hadn't played very much the last 5 or 6 games on defense. He gets waived today. Now, maybe Seattle's going to try to find a way to get him back on the practice squad, but I found this to be curious initially, Rob, because it's like they already had a spot open on the 53 after putting Torrey Horton on injured reserve on Saturday. So now they've got 2 openings. Now they have 2 players that are eligible to return this week. That could be part of the reason why. But it's fascinating that Kendrick was the one that they picked to open up that other spot, given the way he played early in the year, until I went back and watched the All-22 more, and it hit me. There's a real reason, I think, why this move was made. Jay Harbaugh had to be furious with some of the plays that Derion Kendrick did not make on special teams the other day. And the one that jumped out to me, and maybe the Seahawks teach it differently, I doubt they do. I think Jay Harbaugh probably preaches this the same way that every special teams coach I've ever been around would preach it, but he wasn't anywhere close to the ball carrier DK on that punt return that was a 90-yard touchdown. He wasn't anywhere near him, and he was the opposite side gunner, and he went inside of the guy that was trying to block him. He just made it that easy for the guy to seal him inside. He didn't keep his outside shoulder free, so there was no edge contained there, and he was so far away from the ball when he cut inside. That just is not good special teams play. That is not good play from a gunner, particularly one that's coming from the far side of the field where you have a lot more space to cover. You want to be aggressive, but you got to keep that left shoulder clean there. And he simply didn't. And looking back at other reps, there were some other unideal reps from him on special teams where the effort didn't necessarily look like it was there either, where it seemed like he was kind of slow playing it, jogging. Jay Harbaugh, I think, got frustrated by that. I think that's why we see Derion Kendrick now getting a pink slip.
I 100% agree with you. I think that anybody who has questions about it, just watch a replay of Chimere DK's punt return for a touchdown and watch Derion Kendrick at the top of the screen. He is as DK is fielding the ball. Kendrick would have been the right gunner from the punt returner, and it's pretty easy to watch the mistakes that he made. I thought it was a very selfish play on Kendrick's part, and he paid the price for it with getting the pink slip, as you said. I also think to kind of finish on a little bit more of a positive note, again, mentioned Rashid Shaheed, and I think that he and Torrey Horton, when their speed is properly utilized again by Seattle on offense, I do think that you're going to see more big plays and perhaps more effectiveness in the red zone. We had a conversation about this yesterday, Corbin. I failed to mention Eric Sauber at the tight end spot. Look, Elijah Arroyo is a talented tight end, and I am intrigued by what I have seen from Nick Hallert as well. Neither one of them, however, are the blockers that Eric Sauber is. Now, he is eligible to return off of the IR. He had a calf strain. When he does get back onto the field for the Seahawks, I think it's going to allow A.J. Barr to be a little bit more of the receiving threat that we have seen him to be in the past. Saubert's ability to create, just advantageous matchups along the edge of the line of scrimmage, I think is going to help Seattle's running game. I think it's going to make them more versatile in the red zone as well. So again, he is a player that doesn't often get talked about, but I do think that his return to the field for the Seahawks is definitely going to help their red zone efficiency as well.
Yeah, that's really a good point with the discussion we had yesterday, that might be a player we didn't mention that has a bearing on some of those first down runs that aren't going the way that the Seahawks want them to. And then there's that domino effect. And 1 yard difference in the red zone is a huge difference when you're talking about the way that it impacts the rest of your plays and efficiency. So that may very well be the case. When we come back, we are going to shift our focus to the Week 13 opponent coming up for the Seahawks, the Minnesota Vikings, a struggling Vikings squad. We'll take a look at what's new, including Max Brosmer potentially taking over as the starting quarterback this weekend in Seattle. We'll discuss that coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate your support of the podcast. And for your second listen, make sure to check out Locked On NFL twice a day. Our good friends Tyler Rowland as well as Tony Wiggins, Locked On Titans, Locked On Jaguars, respectively, do fantastic work diving into all the analysis and all the details that you're looking for across the NFL. It's twice a day, Locked On NFL on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcasts. Seahawks going to head into Week 13 with their first home game in a while. Feels like it's been a long time since they played at Lumen Field, even though it was only Week 10 when they played Arizona. Minnesota Vikings, the opponent coming into town, and going into the year, Rob, this was a game that we had circled, Sam Darnold's revenge game against the Vikings, who we expected were going to be right in the thick of things atop the NFC North. It has not played out that way for Minnesota at all. Now, they've certainly had some injuries. J.J. McCarthy, who took over as the quarterback in place of Sam Darnold, former first-rounder, has struggled mightily, and now he is potentially going to miss this game in concussion protocol. Carson Wentz, his backup going into the year that started several games when McCarthy had another ankle injury. He's on injured reserve, so he's out for the year. Max Brosmer, the undrafted rookie out of Minnesota, he looks to be the one that would be in line to start in this football game, which that would be a huge what's new, at least for this week, if J.J. McCarthy is not able to get out of concussion protocol for Minnesota.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of Seahawks fans that are, pretty excited about that possibility. I mean, certainly undrafted free agent quarterback, as rookie quarterback coming in here, that makes it sound like this would be an easy game for the Seahawks to win. That said, J.J. McCarthy has struggled enough, and his specific strengths and weaknesses, I think, are a little bit of a contrast with what Kevin O'Connell likes to do, that I wonder if Brosmer might actually be a better fit in Kevin O'Connell's offense. And this is not a guy who has the same kind of mobility. He certainly doesn't have Sam Darnold's, arm strength and accuracy in the deep and intermediate passes. But one of the things that he does do is he can read defenses, and gets the ball out quickly. And when you have the types of weapons that the Minnesota Vikings have with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, then they're going to be able to potentially be able to move the ball at a much cleaner rate. And considering the fact that Seattle just got carved up pretty good by Cam Ward, obviously the number one overall pick, far, a huge difference than an undrafted free agent, but still a rookie quarterback nonetheless. I do think that this is one of those things. Be careful what you wish for, because Brosmer is a good distributor of the football. So I do think that is something that obviously we're going to be talking about in tomorrow's program, where we're basically breaking down all of the key matchups. But I also want to talk about some of the other additions that the Minnesota Vikings made. Of course, they made so many additions along the offensive and defensive lines with Will Fries, the right guard. Of course, he was a player that Seattle was linked to. The center, Ryan Kelly, Fries' former teammate with the Indianapolis Colts. They both went north to Minnesota. Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen along the defensive line, two Pro Bowl caliber defensive tackles that are definitely big-time additions as well. And then their first-round pick was Non-Jaxon, who, unfortunately for the Vikings, also has been somebody who has struggled with injuries. And that's the big storyline here, Corbin. Whether it be at the quarterback position or at other positions along the squad, this team has just been beset with injuries and frankly, some inconsistencies. They are one of the teams that has had the most pre-snap penalties of any team in the league. Not something that you expect for a Kevin O'Connell coach team that has as many veterans as this one does. But that is one of the risks when you bring in so many different veteran players that don't have much familiarity with your offense, especially in offense. Then there is going to be some growing pains. I'm surprised that we are still talking about growing pains, however, for the Vikings, considering how late in the season we are at this point.
Yeah, all the changes that they made, I fell for it. I thought the Vikings were going to be a 10-plus win team again, absolutely. Even if J.J. McCarthy was not as effective as what Sam Darnold was last year for them, I thought the roster that they had built around the young quarterback and the improvements they made to their offensive line, both through free agency and the draft, it felt like this was a team that had built a roster where J.J. McCarthy wouldn't have to shoulder the load and they could still win a lot of football games. But that has not been the case. They've had their share of issues on offense with turnovers. McCarthy, as you mentioned, really has struggled. And now being out, maybe Brosmer for a week, maybe he ends up being able to run this offense a little bit more crisply, because they've had a lot of issues with interceptions and the throws to the left. That was something that's some of us that watched the film in college wondered, is that going to be an issue in the NFL? And it has been for McCarthy to this point. But this is still a team that has a lot of really good players, and a lot of these additions they made in the offseason, those guys are still available. They're still playing. They're still healthy. You've got Jonathan Allen in the middle. There's still a very good defensive tackle. Hargrave's had a rough season. It's been difficult for him. He's not looked like the guy that was an absolute difference maker a couple years ago for the Philadelphia Eagles, or San Francisco before he got hurt a year ago. Has not looked like the same player. But this is a team that's still got a lot of really talented pieces. We know about Jefferson. Jonathan Grenard is one of the best pass rushers in the NFC. They've still got plenty of horses. They got a couple really good DBs on this roster as well that can turn the ball over. We know the aggressiveness that Brian Flores is going to bring to the equation with his blitzing. So this is not a team you should be taking lightly. It's certainly a group that is up against the wall in terms of desperation for postseason play. They're facing a very real situation where another loss could basically knock them out of the playoffs already at this stage of the season. So they're looking to get that big win, that signature win, to try to restart their season and try to get going in the right direction. They've certainly got the pieces to be able to do that. But of course, that quarterback problem, that's been looming heavily in terms of the way that they have underperformed this year. And now they get to see the guy that was their quarterback last year, Sam Darnold, gets a chance to try to take it to him a little bit in subtle Sam Darnold fashion, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And that to me is one of the most interesting things about this game. Just, obviously, I mean, as you know, that this has got to be some revenge factor for Sam Darnold. As cool and calm and as professional as he is, he's not going to admit that this is a game that has kind of a special place for him, but it's got to. And so I am fascinated to see how he performs. Frankly, I'm fascinated from a University of Washington standpoint, just because this is a big rivalry week for the University of Washington playing against the Oregon Ducks on Saturday. I mentioned Byron Murphy the second for the Seahawks. Byron Murphy, the former University of Washington standout, who is now a playmaking defensive back for the Minnesota Vikings, is coming back to Seattle as well. Unfortunately, Seahawks fans know all too well about the interceptions that Sam Darnold has thrown. This is going to be a fascinating homecoming for Byron Murphy and some of those Minnesota Vikings who are coming in here to try to get that upset. Again, so much attention is going to be focusing on Brosmer, the possible third quarterback here for the Vikings so far this season. Don't be surprised at all if it's the defense for the Vikings that winds up being the bigger story when it's all said and done.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rank. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, it's Matchup Wednesday. We'll be diving into all those big positional battles to watch when the Seahawks and Vikings duke it out at Lumen Field this upcoming Sunday. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.